"We're not a shelter for beggars." The manager laughed until he answered, "I came to buy 16 tractors." The man walked through the glass door of the showroom like someone entering a place that wasn't made for him. That's what everyone thought. His worn plaid shirt, pants torn at the hem, feet covered in a red Oklahoman dust that only those who know dirt roads can tell where it comes from. In his left hand, pressed against his chest, a grimy burlap sack. On his head, a straw hat that had more sun baked into it than anyone in that gleaming showroom could imagine. The showroom was enormous, polished concrete floor that reflected the white light from the ceiling. And in the back, lined up like green soldiers, the tractors. Big, new, smelling of rubber and fresh grease. They were machines worth what many people don't earn in years. Silas Thorne stopped in the middle of the showroom. He looked one way, then the other, with that calm that comes from someone who has gotten through a lot in life without rushing. That's when Bradley Sterling appeared. Bradley had been the general manager of that agricultural equipment dealership for almost 12 years. A well-tailored blue suit, white shirt open at the collar, dark, pointed-toe shoes. Behind him, as always, Chad and Tyler, the two salesmen who went everywhere with him and laughed at everything he found funny. Bradley saw the man in the straw hat before he even got close, and he already approached differently. "Can I help you?" he said, in that tone that isn't a question, it's a warning. Silas turned slowly. "Good afternoon," he replied with a deep, measured voice. "I came to look at some tractors." Bradley couldn't hide the sneer. Chad and Tyler exchanged glances behind him. "Look?" Bradley crossed his arms. "Look how, my friend? You know this isn't a museum, right?" Silas didn't answer right away. He just adjusted the burlap sack on his arm with the care of someone carrying something important and looked straight at Bradley's face. "I know what it is," he said simply. "I came to buy." Bradley's laugh came quickly, a loud, genuine laugh from someone who thinks they've heard the best joke of the month. Chad and Tyler each broke into a smile, waiting for what came next. "Buy," Bradley repeated, as if the word had a strange taste. "What exactly do you want to buy?" Silas looked at the rows of machines in the back. 16, he said. 16 what? Tractors. The silence lasted less than 2 seconds. Then came another laugh, bigger this time. Bradley leaned forward a little, slapped his own thigh and turned to Chad and Tyler, like someone about to share a good story at the bar later. 16 tractors, he repeated, for no reason other than to make the situation even more ridiculous. "My friend, this isn't a shelter for beggars. This is a serious business." Silas stood still. He didn't leave. He didn't take a single step back. He just looked at Bradley with an expression that wasn't anger, wasn't shame. It was something deeper than that. It was the look of someone who had heard that tone before, from other mouths in other times, and learned that the right answer is never the quick answer. I need to stop here for a second, because there's a kind of humiliation that doesn't yell, doesn't push, doesn't make a scene. It's the kind that smiles while it belittles, and it hurts in a way you carry for a long time. Bradley still had a smile on his face when he said, "You can leave. We don't have anything here that would suit you." "It does suit me," said Silas, "and I have what you need to close the deal." Bradley sighed like someone doing a huge favor. "Look, I'll be straight with you, okay? You seem like a nice guy. But here we work with high values. There's a process. There's a contract. It's not something you settle just like that over a conversation." He made a vague gesture toward Silas's outfit, without naming what he was implying. But everyone understood. Silas looked at his own hands for a moment. The hands of a man who had been plowing earth since he was 12 years old. The hands that Martha, his wife, always said were the hardest working hands she had ever seen in her whole life. "How much does each one cost?" he asked, without moving from his spot. Bradley exchanged a look with Chad. He decided to answer just to get it over with. "Depends on the model. Starts around 140,000. The bigger ones, 230, 250. Silas nodded slowly, like someone doing a mental calculation. "Then show me the biggest ones," he said. It was the second time Bradley laughed. only this time there was a thread of irritation mixed in with the laughter. "Listen, I already told you this isn't the place." "I heard what you said." Silas cut him off, still without raising his voice. "Now show me the tractors or get me someone who can help me." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, go ahead and leave a like, and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot who are just starting out. Now, continuing. What Bradley didn't know, what Chad and Tyler didn't know, what nobody in that shiny showroom could imagine, was that Silas Thorne had woken up at 4 in the morning that day. He had drunk black coffee, no sugar, like he did every morning for as long as he could remember. He had leaned his hands on the old farm fence and stood there for a while looking into the dark, listening to the sound of the brush before sunrise. Then he had grabbed the burlap sack, stuffed what he needed inside, and told Martha he'd be back before dark. She had asked if he wanted her to come along. He had said no, that it was something he needed to do his own way. Silas was 63 years old. He was the son of a sharecropper, grandson of a field hand, raised in a time when making it to adolescence was already an achievement. He had learned to read with a teacher who came 3 times a week to a one-room schoolhouse, and he had learned to count from sheer necessity, the harshest teacher there is. At 18 he had started working on a wealthier neighbor's farm, not as an heir, not as a partner, as a day laborer. He hauled, planted, harvested, fixed fences. He earned enough to eat and save a little. At 26, he pooled what he had and leased a small piece of land. Most people in the region thought he was taking too big a risk. That leased land was money down the drain. That a poor man trying to get ahead always ends up paying double the price. But Silas planted, and he harvested, and he planted again. Martha came into his life when he was 31. She was the daughter of a merchant from the small rural town nearby, and when her father found out she had her eye on that farm boy, he wasn't pleased. But Martha was the kind of woman who, once she made up her mind, no argument in the world could change it. She said what she saw in Silas wasn't what he had, it was who he was. They got married in a simple ceremony on a Saturday morning. Life wasn't easy. There were drought years that dried up everything they had planted. There were debts. There was a time when their oldest son was about 6 when Silas went 3 days without sleep, wondering how he was going to pay the month's lease. He didn't tell Martha about it back then, but she knew. She always knew. What turned the tide was a combination of patience and an opportunity that came at just the right moment. An old farmer from the area, with no direct heirs, decided to sell a piece of land to whoever could pay in installments and committed to taking good care of it. Silas went to him, sat on the porch of the big house and talked for 2 hours. The old farmer looked at Silas's hands and said, "This man works." And they made a deal. It wasn't all at once. It took years to pay off that land, but he paid it all, every installment, on the day, and the land gave back. Today, almost 30 years after that handshake, Silas Thorne had over 2,000 productive hectares, soy, corn, pasture, an operation that most farmers in the region looked at with respect. Not envy, because Silas wasn't the kind of man who inspired envy. He was the kind who inspired that quiet admiration you feel when you see someone who truly deserved what they have. He didn't have an air-conditioned office. He didn't have an assistant. He didn't wear a suit. He went to the fields every day, in whatever clothes he grabbed first, and the straw hat that Martha had wanted to throw away for years, but he stubbornly kept using because it was comfortable. And that's how he showed up at that showroom. Just as he was. Just as he always was. Back in the showroom, Bradley was losing patience. "Look, sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. This isn't a place to hang around without a real intention to buy. You're disrupting the store's flow." "Disrupting how?" said Silas. "Is there anyone else here?" The showroom was empty. It was a Tuesday afternoon, during a time that was usually slow. Bradley opened his mouth and closed it. Chad coughed. Tyler looked away. It was then that a woman came out of a back office, around 50-something, short grey hair, round glasses, steady step. Evelyn was the financial director of the dealership, and she was there that day only because of a meeting that had ended early. She saw Silas before she saw Bradley, and she stopped, looked again. "Mr. Silas," she said. The manager turned slowly. Silas tipped his hat in her direction. "Mrs. Evelyn, long time." The woman walked toward him with an expression that mixed surprise with a satisfaction she tried to hide but couldn't fully. "My goodness, it's been so long. What brings you here?" "I came to look at some tractors," he said, with the same calm tone as before. "But the manager here is telling me I don't belong." Evelyn turned to Bradley. The manager had the expression of someone who realizes he's stepped in a very wrong place, but doesn't yet know the extent of the damage. "Bradley," she said slowly. "Mrs. Evelyn, I didn't know that." "Didn't know what?" Silence. Evelyn had known Silas Thorne for 15 years. When she was still an account manager at a local finance company, he had been one of the most punctual clients she had ever served. Never missed a payment, never needed to renegotiate. When he bought his second plot of land, he walked into the office with all the papers organized in a folder, explained exactly what he needed, and was out in half an hour with everything taken care of. She had stuck in his mind because she was one of the few people in those early years who had treated the matter seriously, without the tone of someone doing a favor, without the smirk from someone who thought it wouldn't amount to anything. And he had stuck in her memory because clients like that are rare. "Can you tell me what you need?" she said, turning back to Silas, completely ignoring Bradley. 16 tractors, he said. "The biggest ones you have. I'm equipping 3 new areas that I'll start working next year." Evelyn nodded. "Shall we sit down?" "Standing is fine," he said. "It won't take long." But then came the part that Bradley didn't expect, that Chad and Tyler didn't expect, that I swear I didn't expect when I heard this story. Silas slowly opened the burlap sack and pulled out from inside it not a wad of cash, not a folded check, but a simple plastic folder, the kind that costs a couple of dollars at any office supply store. Inside the folder, organized documents. Bank statement printed that morning, proof of farming activity, producer certificate, and a sheet of paper where he himself had written by hand the models he wanted, the specifications he needed, and the payment method he preferred. Cash, everything. Evelyn took the papers, looked again. He did the quick calculation in his head and got confirmation of what he already suspected. Bradley stood still in the middle of the showroom like a man who had run into a room and realized the floor had dropped out from under his feet. Evelyn lifted her gaze from the papers and looked at him for a second that lasted much longer than a second. "Bradley, would you excuse us, please?" Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, feel free to leave a like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us newcomers. Now, continuing. The manager walked out slowly with Chad and Tyler behind him, the 3 of them silent, none daring to look at Silas as they passed. And it was at that moment, as they left, that something happened that might be the most important part of all this. Silas watched them go, and he said nothing. He made no gesture. He didn't smile to the side to savor the taste of the turnaround. He just stood there, exactly as he was, with the burlap sack still over his arm, waiting. There's a kind of dignity that doesn't need an audience. Evelyn pulled out a chair and called over one of the store's younger employees, a man named Cody, who had been working there for a short time and was on the other side of the showroom pretending to straighten a shelf, but hadn't missed a thing. "Cody, get the sales supervisor and bring Mr. Silas some water." "You can just call me Silas," he said. She smiled. The negotiation took just over an hour. Silas knew exactly what he wanted. He knew the technical specs. He knew what each field required. He knew the difference between one model and another, because he had researched for weeks. He hadn't shown up at that showroom on a whim. He showed up after studying, comparing, deciding. The sales supervisor, a man about 45 named Greg, handled the matter with the seriousness it deserved from the very first minute. Maybe because Evelyn was there, maybe because he was simply a decent person. When they reached the final price, it was a figure that made that entire showroom make sense. And Silas closed the deal with a firm handshake. The way he had learned serious business is sealed. But the story doesn't end there, because Bradley, back in the office where he had retreated, found out the exact sale amount when Greg went to register the contract in the system, and he stood in front of the computer for a time that the others in the room later described as awkward. After about 20 minutes, he appeared at the showroom door. Silas was still there, waiting for the final paperwork. Bradley approached with a completely different posture than before, shoulders slumped, without the smile, without the two salesmen behind him. Alone. "Mr. Silas," he began. Silas looked at him without anger. Just looked. I want to apologize for what happened earlier. It was rude of me. I was mistaken." Silas took a moment before answering, not because he was thinking of an elaborate reply, but because when you've been truly humiliated, and then the other person comes back to apologize, it's not automatic to know what to do. The heart needs a second. "I've seen this before," Silas said finally. "Many times." He adjusted the straw hat on his head. "But I'd rather you learn from this than go on without learning a thing." Bradley nodded, not quite sure what to do with that response. It wasn't declared forgiveness, but it also wasn't a closed door. Evelyn, who had been listening from a distance, turned her face away. Before he left, with the signed papers in a plastic folder and the burlap sack back over his arm, Silas passed by Cody, the young man who had brought the water. "How long have you worked here?" he asked. "About 6 months," said Cody, a little surprised by the question. "Keep it up," said Silas. "You treated someone well that everyone thought wasn't worth it. That counts." And he left through the same glass door he had come in through. In the parking lot, the afternoon sun beat down hard. He opened the old pickup truck, tossed the burlap sack onto the passenger seat, and sat for a moment without starting the engine. He thought about Martha, who would ask how it went. He thought about the tractors that would arrive in 3 weeks. He thought about his oldest son, who would finally be able to work those 3 new fields without depending on a neighbor's rented machinery. And he thought, as he sometimes did, about those early years as a day laborer, when he came home with calloused hands and the certainty that he would make it, even when he didn't know how. What gets me about this story, isn't the turnaround. It's what comes before the turnaround. It's the man who walked into that dealership knowing what he would find, and walked in anyway, without changing his clothes, without changing his hat, without needing to prove anything before being treated with respect. He didn't go because he needed to prove something to Bradley. He went because he had a deal to close. The difference between the two things is enormous. Martha was on the porch when he arrived, near the end of the afternoon. She saw his expression before hearing anything, and knew it had been one of those days where a lot happened, but little would be told. "So?" she asked. "Closed," he said. She nodded. Then she looked at the burlap sack. "That sack is going to fall apart one of these days. I've thought about that," he said, sitting in the chair next to hers. "But it works." They sat in silence for a while, looking at the yard, at the dark brush in the back, at the sky changing colors. Silas took off his straw hat and placed it on his knee. He ran his hand over his tired head. "There's something I want to tell you," he said after a moment. Martha turned to him, and he told her. Everything, the manager's tone, the laugh, the word he used, the silence he held inside his chest all that afternoon. Martha listened without interrupting, as she always did. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "And you bought it?" she asked. "I did." "Good," she said. It wasn't a phrase of anger. It was a phrase from someone who understands that the best response to a kind of disrespect is to keep being who you are and doing what you came to do. 3 weeks later, when the tractors arrived at the farm in a line of trailers kicking up dust on the road for nearly 2 miles, Silas was at the gate waiting, in a worn plaid shirt and straw hat. Cody, the young guy from the dealership, came along with the delivery. It wasn't his obligation, but he came. When it was time to sign for the delivery, Silas looked at him. "What's your last name?" "Miller," said the young man. "Cody Miller," repeated Silas. "I'll remember," and he did. But that's a story for another day. End of story. What a story, folks. What a story. I find myself thinking about the number of Silases out there who walk into places and are sized up before they even open their mouths. And I also think about the number of Bradleys who one day will come across someone like that and will have to swallow that smirk turned inside out. What stays with me most from this story is that Silas didn't have to shout. He didn't have to explain himself. He stayed in his place just as he was and let the truth arrive in its own time. That takes courage, more than most people imagine. Tell us what you thought. Where are you watching from? Have you ever been through a similar situation or known someone like that? Leave it in the comments. We read them with great care. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other stories that come every week with lots of emotion and respect for the lives of those who truly live. Thank you very much for your continued company.